Hi, this is Janet Fitch, and it is noon on Wednesday, Pacific, 3 p.m. Eastern, and whatever time it is in your zone. And it is Writing Wednesday, where I answer your writing questions of all sorts, craft questions, uh, psychological questions, business questions, existential questions. And if you have questions for me today, hi, Hope. If you have questions for me today, put them in the chat and I'll try to answer them as we go along. And if you have questions for me in between times, write to me through my website, janetfitchwrites.com, and I can create a Writing Wednesday around your questions so I can do a little bit deeper dive. Um, and if you have questions, believe me, many people have the same questions. So do not hesitate to contact me and send me your questions. I'm very happy to think more deeply about them. Sometimes when questions come up in the talk today, if they're too big for just a quick answer, they might end up as a Writing Wednesday. And that is indeed what happened to today's question, which was from Amy. And Amy asked this question during last week's session, and it was just too big a question to address um, in a quick aside. So let's go into it. The other thing I should say is that if you're enjoying Writing Wednesdays, please subscribe. Um, Definitely helps me gauge whether this is something that you guys want me to continue doing. Hi, Laura. Good to see you. So please subscribe if you haven't. And so here is Amy's question. Um, When I compress or expand time, I often have a sense that I've stepped outside a character's consciousness. This is close third, I believe, she had said in her original question. Feels like cheating. I have to get over this and move on, but it does bring up questions in regard to voice. In deep close third, what is authorial voice? How does it differ from narrator voice? Which voice are the dialogue tags in? In the first pages of a masterwork, has the author created inextricable trust with the reader, such that the reader forgets or excuses the author or narrator's presence? Um, so this is Amy's question. The authorial voice, the narrator coming in, how to how does one negotiate the changes between the author's point of view and the character's point of view? And there's a narrator, sometimes there's a narrator too, telling the story of somebody else, and then you go into that person's point of view. Whereas when you're talking about the author's point of view, you're coming all the way out into the author speaking directly to the reader. So this is a multi-layered question, a very interesting one. I think of, first I was thinking about books that definitely have an authorial voice that comes in unapologetically and decides to speak directly to the reader. Tolstoy is a great example, just the beginning of Anna Karenina. And this is my old copy of Anna Karenina, which is large type. I found it at Goodwill and I just adore it. And I love that it's in super big type. It's like, how can you get a book that's going to take up a whole shelf of your bookcase? But the very famous opening in Anna Karenina gives us our authorial voice, direct from Tolstoy to you. Happy families are all alike. Every unhappy family is unhappy in its own way. This is not a character's thought. This is directly from the author. Um, and then we gradually get into the story. Everything was in confusion in the Oblonsky's house. The wife had discovered the husband was carrying on an intrigue with a French girl who had been governess in the family, and announced to her husband that she could not go on living in the same house as him. So often the authorial voice is used to set the scene. Even if it's mostly like this is an omniscient narrator. So we often come out and hear from Tolstoy directly and then go into a character's point of view, in and out of their heads. Um, so that's that's the strength of the omniscient, is you can go into authorial point of view anytime you like, and it doesn't jar the reader in the least. Well, when you're going to have a close third or first person, and you have an author who sometimes wants to come in and directly address the reader, that's where you get this, Amy's concern that it's cheating to just come out and tell you it was spring, you know, the Germans were approaching from the east, and this and this, and then suddenly we have an I. Um, when we're still in third person, a wonderful book about shifting the intrusion of the authorial voice. It's often called in certain kinds of fiction, this is called metafiction, where the author's intent is to remind you that they are telling a story. And then they go to the created story and you get sucked in, and then suddenly there's the author again reminding you this is a construct. It's a work of art. Um, and that's a very modern thing to want to show that. The 19th century is the seamless dream, but it's not exactly seamless. There's often, people coming, Jane Austen, that's 18th century, but Jane Austen coming in telling you, dear reader, da da da, or making comments like, some guy with a fortune is in need of a single man in need of a, possession of a fortune is in need of a wife. That's not anybody character in it. That's the author setting the social framework. Dickens, many an authorial comment. And it's what we like about him. The fact that your seamless dream is jarred from time to time by the entrance of the author putting his finger on the scale, is fine. We don't. What they're going to say is going to be interesting enough that it's worth knowing that this is the author directly talking to you and telling you some nuance of the scene that you need to know that the character is not likely to think about. Um, One of the wonderful books that has a terrific authorial voice and moves in and out of the characters seamlessly is The Unbearable Lightness of Being. I admire this book so much. And he does simple things like, you know, the unwritten contract of erotic friendship stipulated that Tomas do this. That's not Tomas's idea. That's the author's idea, telling you about the construct within which, the context within which the character has to act. Um, there's, and then we go right into the scene. So sometimes it's like, oh, this is a book. This is what he wants to tell us. He's talking about eternal return as a theme of unbearable lightness of being. Um, and he's talking about the heaviness of burdens crushes us, but it pins us to the ground. But in the love poetry of every age, the woman longs to be weighed down by the man's body. This is his point of view. The heaviest of burdens is therefore simultaneously an image of life's most intense fulfillment. The heavier the burden, the closer our lives come to the earth, the more real and truthful they become. So this is what we call a novel of ideas. So what he starts often starts a chapter with an idea, and then his characters act it out. So the authorial voice is part of the dance. Um, Conversely, the absence of a burden causes man to be lighter than air, to soar into the heights, to take leave of earth and his earthly being, and becoming only half real. I mean, this is the basic construct of the novel, right? Uh, his movements are as free as they are insignificant. Which then shall we choose? Weightness or lightness? So he has a little, it's almost like a little mini essay. And then the next little piece says, I have been thinking about Tomas for many years, but only in light of these reflections did I see him clearly. I saw him standing at the window in his flat and looking across the courtyard. And now we're in Tomas. He lands. So this is a really interesting book to study if you're interested in this topic of authorial voice and how it's woven into a story. Um, Dickens is wonderful about this. It's a good way um, of moving history, moving through history. I had to do uh, some of this in my Russian books, the Revolution of Marina M. And Chimes of Lost Cathedral, because you need, like Amy was asking, it's the compression of time. To move through time, somebody has to pick the reader up in October and move them to January without having to go through every moment, right? Somebody is going to be compressing that time, and usually it's the author. Now she worries that she's has the sense of that she's stepped out of the character's consciousness. I think that um, you sometimes you step out for a line just to catch people up, and then you enter Marina M. and Chimes of Lost Cathedral are in the first person. So you'll see a description of some aspect of the story, of the history, by June XYZ, and then in the next sentence, I, I did so and so. I often put the I in and then back off a little bit and give you a few lines to catch you up and then back in again. Let's see if I have a good example of this. Here's one. Okay. This is time and history. So I'm trying to catch you up. And usually, one doesn't use one's own books to do this kind of thing, but I know the books really well. So as I don't necessarily over prepare for these discussions, I'm just using that. So after many advances and retreats, spring's troops at last broke winter's lines. So we're in the middle of Civil War, so I'm using war metaphor. Ice cracked in violent retorts on the Tikhvina. It put everyone on edge. It sounded so much like gunfire, so I'm starting to slide into the character's point of view by using everyone. It sounded so much like gunfire. And then I come back to pick up the history again, pull out a little bit. Now, because the voice of this book is the narrator is an older character of the first person. She's first person in both ways, but it's an older character describing her life for her younger self. So that's the division between the character and narrator. But sometimes I pull it back and it becomes the author's voice. So um, it sounded so much like gunfire, the breakup of the ice on the big rivers in Russia. Um, Admiral Kolchak, head of the White Army, had emerged from his Siberian stronghold and smashed through the Urals. Okay, so that is not exactly our point of view character. That is me catching the author catching the American reader up on what was happening in 1919. Um, uh, Kolchak was on the way. I'm back in the character because I'm worried about that he's on the way to where I am as the character in the story. The railwaymen knew everything. What a relief to have access to news again. Stiopa Radulovich and I lay in bed in the single room, and he's got a map and he's showing her things. So I bring it back into the room, but I am using it is not cheating, it is skill. I mean, I don't mean my skill, it's a tool, it's a skill. Um, of slipping in what you need the reader to know and not being over self-conscious that you're not in their voice for a sentence or two. And then you move towards them, you get a little flavor of the point of view character, and then you can slip back and give us a little more, and then entering the scene. So it's psychologically, it's a very subtle change. um, some people have to make a declaration about their characters. Dickens is a wonderful example of that. He'll pull back all the way and it goes, this is what's going on. This person had their hand so deep in the till that, their elbow got caught, um, he's explaining what he wants you to know, just give it to you straight rather than trying to develop scenes. He has such a complex social world that if you don't understand kind of the different elements that are going into a Dickens scene, um, you're going to be lost at sea. And a lot of the interesting detail that he's putting in for your enjoyment and edification is going to be lost on you. So he has no qualms about just going in and telling you, who's the good guy, who's the bad guy, how good is he, how bad is he? I'm going to show you, a couple lines of description and then pull back. And then I've got my kid point of view who could never have understood what the author just told you. Um, so so there's the narrator's voice is somewhat in between. Like this is um, in the Russian books, it's a 33-year-old Marina living in America, having escaped, by the skin of her teeth, um, who is telling you, but it is very rare that I pull back into that older voice. I'm more likely to slip in a little authorial clarification. But sometimes I do. Sometimes it's like what I didn't know. That's where the narrator is very useful, is if in building suspense, and some people overdo it. I've got to say, I have read several books that have been generally admired that I have felt the foreshadowing was a little too thumb on scale for me, a little too like neon signs. Say, get it, yeah, we get it. We're not stupid. Um, but the author felt the need, like heavy handing. What I didn't know at the end of every chapter, what I didn't know was, what she didn't know was, I keep that uh, you know, keep that to a minimum. It doesn't mean don't use it, but if you don't want to end every chapter with what she didn't know was. Let the reader get it. Read it's like, oh yeah, she didn't know what a bastard that guy was, um, or what have you. A little foreshadowing doesn't hurt. Um, I think that so metafiction, you're going to get a lot of, because metafiction will have, say, the character is the author. Usually they share the same name. And you're more seated in the story of the of the author almost than you are seated in the story of the character of the author. Makes more the author's voice makes more sense often than the character's voice. But it's definitely in metafiction interesting to, John Barth. I mean, look at these people and notice where kind of where the weight is in the piece. My husband is a great, and I both, but Andrew is a great Nabokov fan, and he said, look at the opening of Penin, which is an academic comic novel, comic tragic for the character, and comic for the reader. And there is an opener with authorial voice. And Nabokov is very playful. So that's an interesting book to see how that works. So let's take a look at this, what you guys are writing. Sarah says, the fact that I've got my large type on a that I picked up at a Goodwill when I was, 17 for like 50 cents or something. I just love it. And she says, reminds me I actually accidentally got Marina M in large type. Yeah, I like large type, but you definitely have to read it sitting up. And Hope says not beach reading though. So Blair, hi Blair. Blair says Muriel Spark does that in The Prime of Miss Jean Brodie. She casually mentions how one of the characters she is discussing will die in a fire one day. You come in and you drop a little bomb like that and you come back out again. I don't think it's cheating. I think it's craft. It's a skill, and allowing for that. It's a dance of moving in and moving out again. Books like Virginia Woolf that deal with consciousness have a great deal of this going on. I brought down To the Lighthouse as one of her more, or did I? I think I brought it down, but God knows what I did with it. Yeah, it's lucky you can't see my desk. It's quite a pile here. Oh, here we go. To the Lighthouse. Because it's a novel of consciousness, there's a lot of interaction between the author voice and character voice, especially because it's the internals of several characters. So to go into their consciousness, come out, look at them, and then sometimes come out and have thoughts. So tracking this point of view, authorial voice, narrator voice, character voice is very interesting to do, and multi-layered approach to the lighthouse. So things like she's explaining to you what the characters, where the character is coming from. That's an author explaining what a character is up to, as opposed to the thoughts of the character themselves, which is close third or first. So had there, this is this father and son have a problem in this page. So had there been an axe handy, or poker, any weapon that would have gashed a hole in his father's breast and killed him there and then, James would have seized it. Such were the extremes of emotion that Mr. Ramsay excited in his children's breasts by his mere presence. So, had there been an axe handy, James would have used it. It's pretty close on James, but such were the extremes of emotion that Mr. Ramsay excited in his children's breasts by his mere presence pulls you back. Now we're the author. Now there's an authorial or narrative point of view, getting a little bit a bigger picture of what's going on. So it's not just James. I just bash your head. It's like, actually, all his children felt that way about it. Standing as now, lean as a knife, narrow as the blade of one. That is not a character's point of view. That's a narrator's point of view. Pulling back so you can see. Standing as now, lean as a knife, narrow as the blade of one, grinning sarcastically, not only with the pleasure of disillusioning his son. So we've gone from his son's thinking over to Ramsay, I believe. We'll know by the end of the sentence. Yeah, not only the pleasure of disillusioning his son, what an asshole, right? And casting ridicule upon his wife, who was 10,000 times better in every way than he was, which is, we think, the narrator. But Wolfe puts in parentheses, James thought. So it's moving you in and out and around. This is only in like 5 lines of text. But also with some secret conceit at his own accuracy of judgment. What he said was true, it was always true. We're back in James's head. He was incapable of untruth, never tampered with a fact, never uttered a disagreeable word to suit the pleasure or convenience of any mortal being, least of all his children, who had sprung from his loins, which is now a father's point of view. No child ever thinks that, right? But it sprang from my loins is like, I don't, most people don't think about their dad that way. But we get back into the pompous Mr. Ramsay. Should be aware from childhood that life is difficult, the facts uncompromising, the passage to that fabled land where our brightest hopes are extinguished, our frail barks founder in darkness. So this is the father's thoughts. And look at how we're moving around in the point of view. But there will always be coming out of point of view and the author telling us what's going on. It is not cheating. It's rounding out the picture. This book would be so much less than it is if we did not have the pullback into the authorial. But it can be done even in first person. With first person, like in Marina M. and in Chimes of the Lost Cathedral, I have really 3 voices. There's a first person character in the Russian Revolution, very young woman. There's the 33-year-old Marina, sadder but wiser, living in California on the beach in Carmel. And then there is the author who is not setting up any kind of foreshadowing. The narrator sets up foreshadowing because she's the older self. What I didn't know was. Whereas the author knows the whole freaking thing and really wants to help the reader understand the scene that is in place, supplying the little bits that you don't know, like, what was happening with the Civil War, what was happening in Europe. The character has no idea, but the author does. What's happening in political circles. The character doesn't know, but I do. The author does. So sometimes if you need to fill in that kind of thing, don't worry that you're cheating, but keep it subtle and notice that if you're going to put a big block of your authorial voice in, you can, but it does have an effect on the reader. They do have to, they become more aware that this is a construct, which is very modern. I mean, uh, metafiction is quite a feature of contemporary literature. The seamless dream is less so, except in historical fiction. Um, I think that it's important, to not feel like you're cheating, but more, just being aware that you can do it, but it does affect how the reader reads it. What other books do you like that have a noticeable switch to authorial voice, or the narrator, a pullback into a, narr- a narrator's commentary? Often it's when you have a character who is not uh, knowledgeable or observant or mature enough to really understand what you want to say there. They're not really able to produce that piece of thinking or information that that close third or first person, they just don't. They can't do it, but you want it to be there. And then you just go, okay, I'm just going to come out and say it. And then you're not tying yourself into knots trying to figure out how to tell the reader that Kolchak is who Kolchak is and where he is, and the Russian Civil War through a character. I mean, I do a lot of it through characters. You have knowledgeable characters who can straighten somebody out, but I like to set a framework. And also, you have these ideas. If you look at the unbearable lightness of being, they're ideas that Kundera wants to deal with. And his characters are really illustrations of concepts that he will tell you right up front. This is what I'm worried about: eternal return, the weight of some people and the lightness of others, and the sort of insubstantiality of the lightness. Um, and then you'll see his heavy character, Teresa, dragging a heavy suitcase up 2 flights of stairs to move in with this guy who hasn't invited her to move in. And yet why does he embrace her? Why doesn't he like, he's got a mistress who's like him, a very light, likes to live very lightly, and be ready for change at any time. And, why is he attracted to this person who struggles with her suitcase up the stairs and has all this baggage? So that's an interesting way to write a book, is you start with the ideas and then you use the characters to illustrate. Inductive and deductive reasoning. Inductive is where you start with the idea and you move towards the character. And deductive is where you start with the character, their life, and then you start to see the idea that starts to deposit itself from the characters. And I'm more that kind of a writer. But you can do it either way. Just, have an occasional idea, please, either through your character or direct from the source. So, what other books are good on having that occasional direct? 18th century tended to be more direct, and what I am the dear reader, I'm doing this, that, and the other. But once you get into the 19th century, the Seamless Dream and Henry James and people like that, um, then they still do it. There's still authorial intrusion. Tolstoy, you know, Dostoevsky. You definitely get a pull back and get to see what Dostoevsky thinks of things, and it's pretty clear. I don't mind it myself, but there are also many, many, many books where the author uh, does not appear, or only in a very subtle way. And having, if you are nervous about it, having a narrator who might be the character in the future who is narrating the events sometimes gives you, it's a liminal zone. You can do a little of each, stick closer to your POV, but allow yourself to pull back, not just spatially, but also in time and the breadth of what they understand about the situation. Um, let's see, who are your favorite authors who move around from from point of view to narrator, or direct authorial commentary. Um, I mean, often what the writer has to say can be very interesting and very well phrased, and we live for when they come back and tell us what's what. Um, let's think about who that might be. I'm trying to think of the books that I've been reading. Sometimes you see it in short story, but you definitely see it more in novel because there's so much more for the writer to juggle and information that the reader needs um, than in short fiction. But short fiction can have it too. Yeah, I want to read Prime of Miss Jean Brodie again. Spark is such an interesting writer. What else? I mean, Shakespeare certainly uses authorial voice. Often it's a secondary character who will set the scene and tell you, what's what. And then you go into the drama of the first level characters interacting, and then sometimes you'll have some minor character passing judgment. I think that the Greek chorus is also often the voice of, it's supposed to be the voice of the collective, the voice of society, the voice of the city. Um, and that can be a way of working in authorial voice. Giovanni's room, but that's first person. Yeah, but you know, first person, it should be harder, right? Because you're supposed to be in that person's head at all times. But he, he pulls back into um, his own adult perspective on what he knows about the scene. Wendy says Garcia Marquez. Yeah, he's going to tell us a lot of things that his characters can't know. And there's a lot of foreshadowing um, in Marquez. Um, there's a lot of backstory that there's just no way the character can break and tell you about the backstory, whereas the author has to fill you in because you wouldn't know what's going on unless you knew the backstory. Who else is good? I hate to turn my back on you, but that's my bookcase over there, so I'm looking at backstory. Mon in The Magic Mountain is certainly, you're going to get a big scoop of Thomas Mon, as well as the story of Hans Castorp and his staying in the sanitarium, TB sanitarium. I mean, I'm finding that aside from metafiction, you don't see that switch to the authorial as much as I would like to see it, because I like ideas embedded in the fiction, and often the characters can't come up with that kind of subtlety of thought, that you have to pull back, and the author has to pull back and do it themselves. And I like that, because I like taking that next step and getting that out there. Who else does it well? The minimalists tend not to do it. Their whole project is to imply, use subtext, not go into people's thoughts that much. So you see it more in the bulkier writers and the more lyrical writers. Although it's not really a feature of lyricism, it's a feature of how much of the world does the writer want to incorporate in the work. That's why there's so much of it in Dickens, because he wants to put the whole world into his books, everything he knows, and he knows quite a bit. And opinions and ideas and what have you. So, any other questions on this narrator? So there's authorial voice, the author, who is not a character, not even in the future. Then there's the narrator, who is a future self describing actions that were taken in the past, and they can pull back. And then there's the point of view character, who is in the scene and is reacting and dealing with what they see. So I wish you, I think we're coming to the end here. I'm wishing you good writing. I hope you take a look at this. And I believe that this is, some of it is dealt with in the Gardner Art of Fiction, in the section about voice, and in the section of common errors. He doesn't like us telling, like, what do you tell, what do you not tell, and controlling the intrusion and what's it for. It's very good. Needless explanation, or explanation where drama alone would be sufficient, are other irritants. So, very, very worthwhile taking a look at. So anyway, I wish you good writing, and please subscribe if you have not done so, and send me your questions to my website, janetfitchwrites.com, and I will be happy to answer your question. So thank you for coming, and have a great week. Okay, bye.